This here is the new Subaru Impreza, and look, it does have some things that set it apart against some of the other small hatchbacks out there. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. I'm going to tell you all about it in this review, so stay tuned, and if you've already subscribed, thanks very much. Let's get to it. Subaru Impreza is a hatchback-only range and all models have all-wheel drive, and in fact it is pretty attractively priced considering that all versions come with all-wheel drive as standard, especially when you compare it to some of its rivals. I'll tell you some good ones soon, but it does make a fair bit of sense from a value for money perspective. The entry-level version is called the 2.0L and it is $31,500 or thereabouts before on-road costs, and for that you're getting things like 17-inch alloy wheels, you're getting full LED headlights and daytime running lights, they're auto lights as well, and beyond that you're getting an 11.6-inch touchscreen media system, cloth trim, some fairly nice features on the inside, but it's not necessarily the most plush feeling one, that entry-level version. If you step up from there into the 2.0R model, you are getting a few extra features that you might appreciate. You're getting 18-inch wheels, also there's LED fog lights at the front too, and there's a different interior cloth trim. You get an auto-dimming rear vision mirror and also heated front seats. So it might stack up to you as a better option than the base model. And then there's this version here, the 2.0S, which sits at the top of the range at about $38,000 or thereabouts. And it does add some features that you might think are really great or you might be happy to leave behind. Things like a power sunroof, which is only a small sunroof. You also get a 10-speaker Harman Kardon sound system, which is a big improvement over the entry-level sound system. And there's other things like a leather accented interior trim, which does lift the ambience quite a lot if you ask me. So I reckon that it does stack up pretty well from a value perspective, but hey, there's some really good alternatives that don't necessarily have all-wheel drive, but are very, very good hatchbacks. Let me tell you about them now. If all-wheel drive is your priority and you want a hatchback, well, the Impreza is basically your only choice when it comes to choosing something at this kind of money, unless you're looking at, well, like a Volkswagen Golf R, which is almost twice the price, but it's also almost twice the car, if you're into performance, that is. Look, now, jokes aside, this car does stand apart from all the other hatchbacks in its segment because it has all-wheel drive as standard, and there is nothing else at this kind of price point that does. So what if you don't need all-wheel drive? Well, you have to look at the Toyota Corolla hatchback, in my opinion, because it's the best alternative when it comes to just being a really good hatchback with some seriously fuel-efficient figures on its side. And also it looks great and it drives really well. And while the boot does have some practicality concerns, it's not very big, it might not suit your needs for that reason, but there is a sedan version of the Corolla which might. There's a Corolla Cross SUV as well. If you are open to the idea of an SUV, it comes with hybrid and all-wheel drive if that's what you're into too. So you can't get that hybrid powertrain technology in this car, but you can in the Subaru Crosstrek, which might be one you also want to check out. It is an SUV with petrol or hybrid options available, all-wheel drive, and basically it's just this car jacked up and more off-roadable. So it might be a better choice for you if you know that you're going to encounter some rough stuff in your life, then maybe it could be a better choice. But hey, if you're just looking for a hatchback and you don't care about all-wheel drive, well, there's the likes of the Corolla I mentioned. You could also check out the Kia Cerato or the Hyundai i30 or the Skoda Scala, which I think really stands out. It's one of the most underrated cars on the market, and hey, it's kind of like a Subaru because not everyone thinks Subaru when they think cars, and I think Skoda's in that same sort of camp, and Skoda Scala could be a fantastic alternative to this, in fact. Which would you pick? Is there something else? Let me know in the comments. I reckon that this new generation version of the Impreza looks so nice. It's definitely nipped and tucked and improved and made to look a little bit more hatchy than the last one that still had that kind of boxier look, but this one has a sleeker look to it. Definitely at the front, you can tell the headlights have been redesigned. They look great. You've got LED headlights and daytime running lights across all models in the range. Alloy wheels on all models as well. This one is the top spec version, so it has nice looking wheels. So does the mid spec one too. And yeah, it just looks pretty nice in profile as well, don't you think? It's got a bit less of a hunchback style look to it this time around. Now at the back, we've still got some issues with boot space with this generation of Impreza. There's no electric tailgate on any model, which is a bit disappointing, even in this top spec. And the boot space you'll see is still less than 300 litres of cargo capacity, which is small for this class of vehicle. If you need more boot space than what is on offer here, you should be looking at a Kia Cerato or a Skoda Scala. And at least, however, in the Impreza, you do get a space saver spare wheel under the boot floor, which is nice. There are a couple of little strange things in the boot. Yes, that's your middle seat belt, which has to feed through that little looper there down to the seat. So it's not actually integrated into the seat back. That's a bit of a carryover from older models. And you do have a light in the back as well. It's a little halogen unit and some little hooking points for shopping bags and so forth as well. So not impractical, but certainly not the most practical hatchback boot. The interior of the Subaru Impreza does feel, well, a step up from the existing model and very much in line with some of the other Subaru models that are out there today, including this big portrait style touchscreen media system here, which does take pride of place on the dashboard. There's no doubt about that. Thankfully though, there are still some hard buttons for your temperature controls. They've got your temperature actual adjustment there, and you've also got your demister buttons in a quick touch point, and volume and tuning dials as well, which I like to see. You do have to use the fan controller down at the bottom of the screen though, so that's a little bit frustrating, but thankfully it's not too difficult of a menu system to get your head around. Not in my opinion anyway. I read a report the other day that said that it's one of the most difficult, but I actually think that if you are used to using an iPhone, you might find it very simple because the colorful icons do sort of mimic what you might see on your Apple screen. And speaking of that, you've also got wired and wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And you've also got a couple of USB ports down here, USB-A, USB-C, and also a little auxiliary port too. But you do get a wireless phone charger in this spec, and that charger is actually a nice size because it means that your phone can actually wiggle around a little bit when you're going through corners and it'll still stay charging. Some other cars don't do that. Now, when it comes to controls, otherwise, you've got a pretty standard looking gear selector. You've got your heated seat buttons for the top 2 grades down here, a little 12-volt port as well, some decent sized cup holders, bottle holders in the doors, and a center console bin as well. Nice soft touch points everywhere. These seats in this top spec model are quite nice. They're leathery and they feel pretty fancy if you ask me. I've spent some time in the 2-litre R version, which also has a cloth seat trim, and I was fine with those seats too. So if you're okay with cloth, maybe you don't need to spend up to this spec. And if you don't want a sunroof, then you definitely don't need to spend up to this spec. But I think that it does feel pretty nice. One thing that's letting it down a little bit, it's still only got a relatively small digital screen as part of the instrument cluster, but I think that really it's not that big of a deal. Some other cars have big digital screens that are actually not that easy to deal with. So look, I think it's pretty good. Some people will still hate that there's so many buttons on the steering wheel, but I find, being a Subaru driver of years gone by, that you do get used to these buttons pretty quickly. And maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just in tune with Subarus. Let me know if you're not in the comments section. I'd love to battle it out with you. All right, let's check out the second row space, see if it's big enough for me. From a space perspective, this car is pretty good. I've got this seat set for my driving position at 182 centimeters or 6 foot. Yeah, I've got knee room, I've got foot room, I've got a little bit of headroom. You just have to watch your head if you're getting in and out and you're a taller person. You might find that it is, well, a bump fest. Thankfully though, the seat position is quite good. It's more like sitting on a stool than sitting down into a lovely lounge or something though. You sit up quite high, you get a bit of a view over what's happening up front, and that might be great if you've got kids in booster seats or you're taking adults with you. But what isn't great if you are doing that is that there are no directional air vents in the back of this car, and that could be a deal breaker for some family car buyers. I would understand if it was. Now, you've got USB ports here, USB-C and A, and there is a bit of a hump to contend with, a transmission tunnel intrusion there, but you do have the things you would expect, like a map pocket, bottle holders in the doors, and you've also got ISOFIX points in the window seats and 3 top tethers too. Plus, there is a flip down armrest here with very, very shallow cup holders. That's only like 2 knuckles worth, which is not a lot of knuckles. So yeah, I reckon it could be better, definitely. And if you are looking for something that's maybe a little bit more family friendly, make sure you check out my full detailed review of the Subaru WRX, because there's a wagon in that range and it's really good. Or the Subaru Outback, which is also really good. Or the Subaru Forester, which is also really, really good. All the links are in the description and they are all more suited to family car buyers. So if you're a single or in a couple, or you only occasionally use the back seat, this might still be fine. Let me know in the comments. At launch, there's just one powertrain available for this new generation version of the Impreza, a 2-litre 4-cylinder boxer engine. It's not turbocharged, and the outputs are relatively modest for the class. It comes with a CVT automatic transmission as standard, but it does have 8 stepped shifts to make it feel more like a conventional gearbox. In other ways, it feels like a very bad CVT. I'll tell you about that in a sec. And it's also got all-wheel drive as standard. So look, it might tick the box for you, but there's also a hybrid available in other markets. And Subaru Australia says they are considering it for ours. Do you think you'd pay extra to have hybrid? Let me know how much more you'd be willing to pay in the comments section below. This generation of Impreza is much like the existing model to drive, and without the context of everything else that's happening in the world of cars, that might be fine. But other cars these days do drive better than this. And it's not to say that this drives badly, it's just not as polished and not as well-rounded as some of its rivals out there. And things that, well, maybe aren't as refined or as lovable include this engine and transmission combination. Look, it'll do the job for you, there's no doubt about that. And you might be absolutely fine with it if you are an existing Subaru customer, for instance. But I'll say this, it's like they've tuned the throttle and the brake to feel really sensitive to make it feel like it's got much more performance than it actually does have, because it's certainly not a powerhouse powertrain. And look, I reckon that this will be fine for urban drivers and those who maybe live in country towns and just run into town and back, drop off the kids, whatever it may be. But yeah, it's not going to be one for the thrill seekers, but if you are looking for a more thrilling Subaru drive experience, buy a WRX. You'll be happy, or at least happier than if you were going to buy this. Right, so the engine and transmission are tuned to feel a little bit more zesty than they are, and the transmission itself I've found to be a little bit annoying. So it is still a CVT auto, and it still has that sort of slurry action that those sorts of transmissions can have. So if you're taking away from a standstill, you sort of feel it going, and even on a slight incline like this. But look, it's not thrilling, so don't come at it thinking that it will be. I guess the other thing is, though, it's not terrible, and for the most part you might find that it's actually a pretty livable drive experience. There are paddle shifters if you want to take matters into your own hands and shift in a manual mode, even though it's not really manual. It's also not the smoothest ride. It tends to fall into the lumps and bumps of the road surface without necessarily cosseting you from what's happening under the tires. And it's also not the most refined drive experience in terms of the noises that come from under the bonnet, and there's also quite a bit of road noise intrusion as well. And when it comes to the steering, it's also not setting any benchmarks in terms of responsiveness or feel or anything like that. So look, on the whole, it doesn't set any benchmarks, and I don't really think it's trying to, not at this kind of money. And so it might be perfect for you if you don't really care. If you just want an all-wheel drive hatchback. So let's talk about fuel consumption. 7.5 litres per 100 Ks is the official combined average figure for the entire range. And look, during my week in the R model and a few days in this S, I've seen a fair bit higher than that. You'll see the figure on your screen now, and I don't think that's terrific. At the time I'm filming this, there is no ANCAP or Euro NCAP safety rating for this car, but it does come stacked with safety technology and equipment. Things like autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian and cyclist detection. There's also an emergency steering assistance feature and lane keeping assistance and blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, a reversing camera, rear parking sensors, and also rear autonomous emergency braking. So it'll jam on the brakes if it thinks you're going to hit someone or something, which is really handy technology to have. And if you choose those. The higher grade R or S models, you also get adaptive headlights, so they will steer with your steering, which is kind of cool. And as well as that, those versions get a surround view camera. Also, all versions of this car have 9 airbags. Safe? Yeah, I reckon it is. In Australia, there's a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty for the Subaru range, and there's a 5-year cap price servicing plan as well. Now, the service intervals are every 12 months and 15,000 kilometres. So that means the cap price plan spans out to 5 years, 75,000 kilometres. And look, the service pricing, on average, over that 5-year period is actually quite high. You'll see the average on your screen now. And for context, that's about twice as much as it will cost on an annual basis to maintain a Toyota Corolla. So yeah, it's not necessarily the most affordable. And also you only get 1 year of roadside assistance with this car included. So not fantastic, but also not terrible, really. Look, I reckon the Subaru Impreza does still deserve to be in the market because it offers all-wheel drive at a more attainable price point in a hatchback than any other brand out there. And look, that's its point of difference, and if it suits you and your needs, then maybe it is the right car for you. But for anyone else who doesn't necessarily need all-wheel drive or a hatchback or a combination of the two, there might be better options out there, as I've mentioned throughout this video. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. See you in the next one.